Today I want to cover a fair bit of the history of Western Europe after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, because the changing political landscape would have dramatic effects on the history of the Church in Western Europe and further afield to the East. In an age where politics and religion and church were two sides of the same coin, the conflict between the two and their union would set the backdrop for many of the important church events of the Middle Ages. So let's go back to the Franks. The Franks were a Germanic tribe first mentioned by the Romans around AD 260 as both their allies living in their own lands and their enemies from outside their lands trying to invade. Ultimately, the Franks were a Germanic tribe moving westward from the Rhineland towards modern-day France to get away from other Germanic tribes and invaders. Whilst the Franks settled in the Rhineland and northern France, Gaul as a Roman province was Arian. Arian is a heretical version of Christianity, if you think back to some of our earlier sessions, which doesn't believe that the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, is actually uncreated, eternally God. They believe the Son of God is created by the Father, and so they're not really Christians. So at this time when the Franks are moving in and settling in northern France and the Rhineland, most of modern-day France, and indeed Spain and large parts of Italy and Germany, are under the control of Arian Christians, namely the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and others, those who brought down the Western Roman Empire. The Visigoths would conquer and settle in southern France and Spain, whilst the Franks were left largely alone in the north. At this point, the Western Roman Empire was dead. The barbarians had succeeded, and the so-called Dark Ages had come. And among the small various Frankish kingdoms, one would grow to dominate the others and unite the Franks. And this was the Merovingian kingdom, the one closest associated with the old Roman power structures and military ways of doing things in northern Gaul. In 481, Clovis I ascended to the throne and would become the first king of what we would eventually know as France. Clovis would conquer nearly all of modern-day France except for Brittany and the lands next to Switzerland and Italy. But he would also rule modern-day Belgium and the Rhineland. Here is a map of what Clovis eventually conquered, starting up here in the Rhineland and slowly expanding his way down, but missing off Brittany and these areas close to Italy and Switzerland. Now, Christianity was present throughout Western Roman Empire. There were bishops in all the major cities and monasteries too, and as I said, the Visigoths and the other Gothic barbarians had largely removed the authority of the Pope from their lands. They were Arian heretics after all, but they never completely got rid of the Catholic Christianity. And due to this, the Christianity that remained in Gaul when Clovis came to the throne and conquered France was predominantly Arian, and certainly politically, Arianism dominated Western continental Europe. And paganism was rising in numbers as well, because pagans were entering from the east, including many of the Franks. Clovis himself was born and lived a lot of his life as a pagan. It's thus perhaps surprising that Clovis, born a pagan, married a Christian woman, a Burgundian princess, who was not Arian, but Catholic, aligned with the Pope in Rome and Orthodox Christianity. And she persuaded Clovis, eventually, after much heartbreak over their children dying and other events, of the truth of Christianity, and that the Son was truly uncreated God, begotten before all time, the one true God, not a creation as the Arian heretics believe. And so Clovis was eventually baptised on Christmas Day in 508, following a victory at an important battle. And this was perhaps the most significant baptism in Western Europe. Clovis was baptised into the Catholic and not Arian Church. As he conquered most of France and Western Germany, he kicked out the Arians and he brought more bishops and faith in line with the Bishop of Rome. Before he died in 511, he called the First Council of Orleans, in which 33 bishops from across his realm gathered together, and the link between the crown and the Catholic Church was cemented. His being buried in Paris would likewise cement that city as the centre of French power to this day. Clovis left his empire, if we remember, that's all of these lands that we see here. He left that empire divided between 4 sons, who would unite only to defeat Burgundy and modern-day southeastern France and bring that under Frankish control. The realm would remain a loose alliance of family kingdoms for hundreds of years. But for a bit of context, to help link this session with what we've done before and bring it all together in our minds, we should bear in mind that the children of Clovis ruled at the same time as the Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian the Great, who reconquered Italy and North Africa and parts of Spain from the Vandals and the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. So this is a map of Europe in 565 AD. You can see the Byzantine Empire around Constantinople and all the reconquest of Justinian. But also you can see the Frankish realm built up by Clovis and his children, all happening at the same kind of time. And so we can see, broadly speaking, power is consolidating in 2 areas. In the Eastern Roman Empire and in the Frankish realms over here. The Eastern Roman Empire, tied of course as it was to the bishops in Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch and Jerusalem. The Frankish kingdom tied to the Pope in Rome and the structures of the old Western Roman Empire and the province of Gaul. As we know, the gains of Justinian for the Byzantine Empire were slowly lost, and with the rise of Islam, the Byzantine Empire became a shadow of its former self. But in the West, the Franks continued to consolidate their power. Our next important Frankish man is Charles Martell, a Frankish statesman and prince and general who ruled the Franks in practice, if not in theory, till his death in 741. He would put an end to the Islamic expansion and conquest of the West. Charles Martell is known for centralising the power of Francia, re-establishing Frankish dominance of the West, as well as setting the groundwork for the entire feudal system of the Middle Ages. Charles Martell decisively defeated the Umayyad Caliphate at the Battle of Tours, also known as the Battle of Poitiers, in 732, with the Muslims retreating back across the Pyrenees to Spain, setting the scene for Charles Martell's grandson to fundamentally change the world. That grandson of Charles Martell was Charles the Great, more commonly known as Charlemagne, King of the Franks, King of the Lombards, and Emperor of the Romans. Charlemagne would become the first recognised emperor in Western Europe since the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, and he established what is known as the Carolingian Empire. Now, like other people known as the Great we have met on this series, such as Constantine the Great and Justinian the Great, Charles the Great is a man of mixed virtue and vice, a complicated man whose legacy is undoubtedly world-changing, but also far from black and white. Charlemagne at first ruled essentially modern-day France alongside his younger brother. But when the younger brother died in 771, Charlemagne took sole charge and things began to speed up. He removed the Lombards from northern Italy and became protector of the papacy in doing so. He invaded Muslim Spain, took control of the Pyrenees and the land just beyond them, keeping Islamic expansion firmly away from the minds of the Moors leading that part of Islam. And he invaded the modern-day Netherlands and beyond, deeper into the lands of the Saxons in modern-day Lower Saxony. And here we begin to see the grey. When he conquered the lands of the Saxons, he gave them a simple choice: convert to Christianity or die. In 782 in Verden, he had 4,500 Saxons executed, and he destroyed an important pagan pillar, a place of worship called Imnesul. He had a church built where it sat on top of that site, and later had a pope bless that church. Powerful statement, but is that really the way that Christ would have the expansion of Christianity go ahead? Now, Charlemagne ruled an immense empire, and in recognition of all that he did, from freeing the Pope from the Lombards to battling the Muslims in Spain and conquering the likes of the Saxons and converting them, Pope Leo II crowned Charlemagne in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome on Christmas Day 800 as Emperor of the Romans. But what was behind and besides this amazing achievement? Well, Pope Leo is an interesting character who no doubt we'll deal with again. Pope Leo was attacked in 799, 1 year before, by the supporters of his predecessor, people who tried to rip out his eyes and his tongue because they felt that only a nobleman should be allowed to be pope. And this Leo is the son of a Greek, possibly even the son of an Arab. Leo, however, managed to escape his attackers as they tried to tear his eyes and tongue from his flesh, and he was helped by some of Charlemagne's envoys and carried to the court of Charlemagne. Charlemagne backed the Pope, as he saw it as his duty to do so as protector of the papacy. And so he returned to Rome shortly after the Pope did, and there, in the chapel, he was crowned Emperor of the Romans. It is said that Charlemagne had no idea the Pope had planned to do this and would have refused if he had known in advance. But it's unlikely he had no clue whatsoever, and when he entered that place, the Basilica, for prayer, on that day, and he saw a mighty golden crown upon the altar, he must have known what was coming and could have backed out. Of course, if the Pope makes Charlemagne the Emperor of the Romans, it begs the question, what is happening in the Eastern Roman Empire, where the actual Roman Emperor should be, whose lineage can be traced all the way back to Constantine and beyond? You see, the issue was that the person on the throne of the Byzantine Empire at this time was a woman, Irene of Athens, a figure controversial in church history for more than just being a woman on the throne of the imperial empire, as we will find out more in our next session. Now, the Pope appears to have considered it impossible to have a woman upon the Roman throne, and the Byzantine Empire was so weakened by its war against the Muslim caliphates that it was in no position to protect the Pope in any case, or interfere with anything the Pope might do in the West. Therefore, the Pope saw Charlemagne as a continuation not of the now defunct Western Roman Empire, but the true successor of the Eastern Emperor Constantine VI, who had been deposed and replaced by Irene. Now, as far as the world was concerned, there could only be one Roman emperor and one Roman empire. And that causes an issue, because now you have one in the West and one in the East. The deep offence caused by the crowning of Charlemagne by the seemingly preposterous title Roman Emperor would seal and accelerate the split between Eastern and Western churches and have lasting impact on the history of Europe through to the Crusades and beyond. Especially when it's at this very time that the doctrinal differences over the understanding of the Trinity between the West and the East, with the West changing the wording of the Nicene Creed, were coming to a loggerheads. Perhaps equally importantly was the massive power grab made in this move by the Pope in terms of the Church. In one fell swoop, and without any prior authority or precedent, the Pope of Rome had established himself as the one with the right and the power to appoint the lawful emperor of the Roman Empire. Not only did this make the imperial crown a gift from the Pope, but behind that is the subtle implication, or not so subtle, the idea that the Pope is above the secular emperor. The emperor derives his power and authority from the Pope. Of course, the way the emperor sees it is that the Pope is protected by the emperor, who is above the Pope. The beginnings of papal supremacy over politics, religion, military, and all of life in Western Europe was being born, and the seeds of the conflict between emperors and kings and the Pope are now beginning to form. Charlemagne, for his part, strengthened the power of the Church throughout his realm. He updated and strengthened the standards of education and morality in the clergy. He endowed great wealth upon the Pope and the papacy and churches and monasteries. He standardized liturgical practices, and he made sure that as Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, he could directly discipline not only the laity, but the clergy too. In January 814, Charlemagne died, and Europe looked very different to how many would have believed possible a few centuries earlier. There was now two Roman empires, the Byzantine Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. Now, how big was the Holy Roman Empire at the death of Charlemagne? Well, here is one final map to help you gather an idea of its scope. It starts off here in these original lands ruled by the Franks, conquered into Italy, Corsica, Sardinia, and all of these white lands here were all owing tribute and under the protection of Charlemagne. This is an immense empire, by no doubt, and it is something of a truly astounding nature that it could be held together by one man. Of course, as future would show, it didn't stay together, and the eventual division of Charlemagne's empire would lay the groundwork for the modern states of Germany and France as we know them today.